it's been a while since it's been a positive trend or a positive market, but we're going to go through it and hopefully we can come out of it with some tips as well as some expectations and reflection.
In 2024, finally, as regular Overdrive readers will know, owner-operator income was up on a year-over-year basis. Mike Hosted, the voice you heard at the top, as he makes clear, that's a first in what's been an exceedingly tough 3 and more years now as freight demands declined, revenues and income falling for many owner-operators as costs just rose through much of the period. The 2024 income gain also comes despite even further rates and revenue declines last year, a sure sign that successful owners are tightening the operation, increasing fuel efficiency to reduce costs as much as possible, running more miles too. All this was made clear on March 25 when ATBS Vice President Hosted presented the firm's semi-annual update offering an economic outlook for the year ahead as well as looking for lessons within the benchmarking data ATBS derives from its tens of thousands of owner-operator clients. Today, we're going to essentially let the tape roll on Hosted's presentation. You can follow along by downloading his slides in the post that houses the podcast for April 7th, 2025, or access the YouTube version of the broadcast to listen along with the presentation of those slides. Lots of great data within there. Yet another bit of positivity to emerge from the ATBS session had to do with the spot market, particularly for flatbed freight in year 2025 so far. The moves up and down in the spot indices Hosted sees as particularly valuable as near-term indicators of demand in the market. And though the positivity there is tempered by a big degree of uncertainty made even bigger by the president's tariff announcements this past week, if the surge in flatbed freight and demand seen so far this year doesn't just prove to be a result of a kind of importer's pre-buy to beat a variety of tariffs on goods coming across U.S. borders, we could be headed in a longer-term positive direction.
This spot market rate moves very, very quickly. So we've gone up 18 cents here in the last 6 weeks in terms of true rate in the spot market. So this is a really encouraging sign that there's more freight that needs to be hauled. Not only that, but the rates are trailing up behind it. So
time will tell if it lasts, and I'd say the conditions all around don't suggest any new obvious strategies on the cost front. Keep tightening the belts there for sure, but don't close your eyes to new opportunities that could arise. Reminds me of Gary Buck's advice around freight, around customer identification and the time to strike. Likewise, when some measure of a kickstart might truly arise in the economy. Buck's advice came back in late September, before elections' outcomes were known, and following the Fed's moves to begin to ease off the cost of borrowing with interest rate cuts. You heard some of that here on Overdrive Radio. Buck's advising to set a calendar reminder for 4 to 6 months out from the time of the cuts. Odds are, he said, that's about the time the business will change. As it takes time for companies to have confidence to place more orders, then the companies manufacturing have the confidence to ramp up production, and the cards begin to fall and make things move. Well, here we are, 4 to 6 months on. Yet, looking at the stock market since the Trump tariff announcement, you can't say business confidence is exactly the rule, of course. Yet, that flatbed freight's been moving up. As noted, and a couple weeks back, dry and reefer rates and volumes finally joined in on the spot market. Maybe Bucks was right on the timing in some ways. Maybe, in the real economy, things are in fact changing for the better. Again, time will tell. For now, let's learn what we can from the past year and then some with ATBS Vice President Hosted.
And hopefully we can come out of it with some tips as well as some expectations and reflection.
On the other side of a break, we drop in right at the beginning of his talk, delivered March 25. Again, if you're not watching the YouTube version of this podcast, you can download all the slides via a link you'll find in the show notes wherever you're listening, and in the post that houses this podcast for April 7th, 2025 at overdriveonline.com/overdrive-radio.
Ultra-low sulfur diesel falls short, but Defender steps up providing advanced lubricity to prevent engine wear and tear. And that's not all. Our exclusive IDX4 detergent cleans out harmful deposits, keeping your engine firing on all cylinders. The result? More power, better performance, and a 5% increase in fuel economy or more. Protect your engine. Choose Howe's Diesel Defender today. Visit howesproducts.com for more information and where to buy.
That's HOWES, howesproducts.com.
All right, everyone. It is 4 o'clock Mountain Time, 6 on the East Coast, 3 on the West Coast. So we're ready to get started. Good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. Appreciate you attending today. My name is Mike Hosted. I'm a vice president here at ATBS. I've been fortunate enough to spend 16 years here now, doing a little bit of everything throughout the years. And now I get the opportunity to talk to you all and talk about what's going on in the trucking industry. So that's our goal today, is just go through the economic environment of trucking, what some of the trends were in 2024, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're expecting in 2025 as well. There were a lot of really good questions that were posed, and I read through every single one of them, so I appreciate all of you posing your questions and giving me feedback before the webinar. I'll try to get to as many as I can. There's also the ability to ask a question within this webinar. I do have that question box pulled up, and I'll get to those questions at the end, but please feel free to type out your questions as we're going through this. If you need more clarity on a topic I'm going through, if something pops in your mind that you just want more information about, I may or may not have the exact answer, but I'll try to answer it the best I can. But yeah, again, thank you for coming today, and let's just get started going through the data. There's a lot of good stuff in here, and some positivity we're seeing. It's been a while since it's been a positive trend or a positive market, but we're going to go through it, and hopefully we can come out of it with some tips, as well as some expectations and reflection. So first off, I always like to get started looking at the economic environment of trucking. So what is going on in the trucking industry at this moment? And there's a lot of changes happening right now, as you know. But the first thing I always like to look at, and the thing that I feel is the pressure cooker, the pressure checker, if you would, of the trucking industry, is the spot market. The spot market is essentially spillover freight, small shippers, freight that can't get hauled by carriers, things like that. So this moves up and down very quickly with market conditions. It's a really good barometer. Contract rates are one thing, with P&G and JB Hunt, or Walmart and Swift. Those are contracts. Those are set 6 months, 8 months, 12 months out, where it's like, this is going to be your rate for the next 6 to 12 months. The spot market moves every single week depending on how much the freight needs to be moved. So we get this from the folks at truckstop.com, and we track this data pretty regularly because it gives us a really good pulse on the marketplace. And so on the left here, what we're looking at is the number of loads per one truck looking for a load on truckstop.com. And so anytime you see that number of loads go up, that means it's harder to get your freight booked. Therefore, you probably have to pay more in order to get your freight moved. And so you can see this stands the test of time. If we look down at the bottom, in 2018, freight got really good. We had a really good year in 2018, and what do you know? The spot market went up. There was more pressure and more loads to haul, so then rates went up accordingly. So at the peak there, in about July of 2018, we were about 75 loads per one truck looking for a load. And even after I back out the fuel surcharge, because I always like to look at the true rate, what's the rate after my fuel surcharge expense? Rates went up all the way up to 242 in 2018. And we fell off in 2019, just kind of bouncing along the bottom. We really bottomed out in early 2020 when the pandemic hit and the world kind of shut down. So what happened, we went down to about 20 loads per truck, and the true rate was all the way down to $1.54 right on the onset of the pandemic. Then you see this explosion in the number of loads that needed to be hauled during the pandemic, basically from July of 2020 through about July of 2022. We just had an explosion of freight. And the reason for that is because of lockdown. Everybody was on lockdown. They couldn't go spend their money on travel or at restaurants or any of those types of things. So their spending shifted to more of a consumer home-based spending. People were buying new TVs, Peloton bicycles, furniture. They were improving their home because that's the only place they could go. That's where they spent their money. And so what that did was that caused an explosion of freight that needed to be moved. Not only that, but we couldn't hire drivers. We couldn't buy trucks. It was just difficult to do everything. So at the peak, here at the very top, you can see we peaked out at about 240 loads for every one truck looking for a load. So it was very competitive to try to move freight. And at that time, rates went all the way up to 274, even after you back out the fuel surcharge. If you do the math there, it's about 315 when you add in the fuel. So really just an explosion of freight, and then rates had to follow it on the way up. Then in early 2022, the world kind of changed. The invasion of Ukraine happened, inflation hit, lots of different things happened all at once in early 2022. Not only that, but consumer spending shifted back. Everybody had been bottled up for a couple of years. They decided they wanted to spend their money on air travel and restaurants and things like that. Well, yes, that may or may not be good for certain aspects of trucking. It's not good for a lot of them. So that shifting, the war in Ukraine, inflation all hit at once, and freight fell off the map here. You can see we really have just been bouncing on the bottom since about mid 2022. We're seeing about 70 loads per truck, and I'll tell you, the equilibrium has changed. There's a lot of brokers, posting 3 times, things like that. So the world has changed, and the break even has changed to about 70. But anyway, true rate is now at about $1.86 to $1.88 over the last 3 years now almost. And so the thing that's interesting here is the floor has been raised since prior to the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, we were down at $1.54. Now we're up in the $1.85 to $1.90 range. That tells us that the floor has been raised. And the reason that is the case is because our costs have gone up, right? Truck payments, insurances, everything has gone up in price, meaning we can't go down to the levels we were at pre-pandemic, and this is just a new floor and the lowest that shippers can pay. So again, we've just been bouncing on the bottom. We keep seeing these false starts where it's like, oh, things are getting better for a couple months, and then they fall back down. So it's been kind of frustrating. I have this through February of 2025, but what I want to show you next is really encouraging, actually. So this is really, really busy, and I'm going to show you what it means right after this. But what I want you to hone in on is week 4, which is what I was just showing you. Week 4, we were at 68.8 loads per truck. The rate was 228, and then even after I back out the fuel surcharge, we were down to about $1.86. If we track all the way down to the bottom, this is as of Monday. So this was literally yesterday. Truckstop.com had posted this, and you can look through week 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've been climbing in the load volume pretty considerably the last 8 weeks. So as of Monday, we were at 100 loads per one truck looking for a load, an all-in rate of 242. And then if you look at the right, even after I back out the fuel surcharge, we're all the way up to 204. So we're accelerating really quickly in that spot market. And that's kind of what I was alluding to, right? Those contract rates, those are in place for 6 months, a year at a time. When you're at a carrier, this spot market rate moves very, very quickly. So we've gone up 18 cents here in the last 6 weeks in terms of true rate in the spot market. So this is a really encouraging sign that there's more freight that needs to be hauled. Not only that, but the rates are trailing up behind it. So really encouraging that we're seeing this happen. And when I look at it from a different angle, when I go back to our chart here, look at that increase on the very right there. Anytime we see an increase like that ever in history here, we've entered into a really robust freight market. So I don't know if that's going to happen this year. There's a lot of different variables like interest rates, like tariffs, things of that nature. But this is the highest and quickest we've gone up in terms of load volume, and then rate going up at a certain rate too. So we're really seeing a rapid increase here the last 6 to 8 weeks in terms of freight volumes, but then also rate in that spot market chasing it. So again, there's a lot of variables out there, but I would tell you this is the most encouraging sign we've had for the last 3 years in terms of a freight rebound. So very optimistic by seeing this. I've been watching it every Monday, and I tell you what, every time I see it, it keeps going up, and I keep getting more excited because we've had these false starts, we've had these, things that looked encouraging, but nothing to this magnitude yet. So very, very, very encouraging from a spot market standpoint, because it really does measure, how quickly things are changing in certain marketplaces. So that's the spot market. That's very necessary to understand, very necessary to know. Next, we're going to look at the Cass Freight Index. And so the Cass Freight Index is pretty much the opposite of the spot market. This is going to deal with major shippers, major carriers. This is looking at contract rates. So again, those rates where a certain carrier is going to say, I'll haul 100 loads on this lane for a month, and it's going to you're going to pay me this much for every single one of those. So this is also standing the test of time, and I'll start again at 2018. This slide is actually looking at freight volume. So this is the amount of freight that is moving over this period of time. And I like to look at these blue bar charts here at the bottom. In 2018, freight was up, right? We were moving more freight year over year than we were the year prior. So we were on a considerable uptick in terms of the volume of freight. And again, it's simple supply and demand. Anytime there's more volume and we don't have more trucks, they have to pay more to get their freight moved. So we saw that volume go up in 2018. We saw it go down in 2019 and then plummet in early 2020 when the world shut down. Then coming out of that at the end of 2020 and through 2022, we saw growth in terms of volume. Again, that was that consumer shifting or consumer spending shift towards those home goods. So freight just exploded in terms of volume. Then we hit 2023 and we've been contracting. And again, it follows that consumer spending. And when people started traveling and eating out again and things like that, freight volume followed it downward. Not only that, but inflation, our dollar couldn't go as far. So it's been a tough freight market in terms of volume in 2023 and 2024, to say the least. So again, that was volume. That's the amount being shipped. Next, we're going to look at rates. So this is going to be the expenditures index, or what is being spent. And so again, I really like to look at these blue bars at the bottom. This shows us year over year gains in 2018, 2019, and 2020 rates were going down. And then in late 2020 through 2022, we saw rates go up at an unprecedented rate. We've never had that happen before, but they just skyrocketed due to that demand. Again, we shifted our spending. We couldn't buy trucks because they weren't available. We couldn't hire drivers. We couldn't train them. It was just impossible. So rates went through the roof. And then in 23 and 24, we've been contracting in terms of rates. But you can see at the right there, we're at pretty much at equilibrium now, where we're not going down any further because we simply can't. Not only that, but we're really coming to equilibrium in terms of the number of trucks, the number of trucking companies, and the volume of freight. So this has been much needed. I've said it over the last few times we've done this, but we've actually needed failures in the trucking marketplace to get things back to normal. We simply added too many trucks at the late end of that boom in 2022. Trucking companies were adding, trucks. They were hiring drivers, trying to chase that really good rate, as anybody would. But what happened was we flooded the market with all those trucks and all those drivers. Then when freight shifted in 2023, all of a sudden we have way more trucks than we have a need for. And shippers are like, hey, I can charge less now because you need to keep your trucks moving. So it was a really big equilibrium shift where we contracted at a rate that we've never seen before coming out of the pandemic. So what goes up must come down, and it came down very hard just as fast as it went up. So it's been a really tough, couple of years, to say the least, where volumes have been down, rates have chased it down accordingly. But again, it's starting to look like things are coming to equilibrium. And not only that, what I just showed you in the spot market, we're actually starting to see really positive signs that rates are on the way up. So what are fleets saying? Here at ATBS, our full job is to work for the independent contractor. Our goal is to help you make as much money as possible and to make sure that you're paying as little in taxes as possible. That's our job. That's our goal. That's what we want for every one of our clients. However, we are fortunate enough to speak with a lot of the trucking companies out there, asking them what's going on. We give them a lot of feedback on their program, saying, hey, your drivers are struggling here. We need to make some tweaks to your program, things like that. So we do a lot of work on the backside trying to help trucking companies run a better program to help our clients be more successful. And so we get the opportunity to talk to these trucking companies and ask them what's going on. And I'm talking about the big ones, Swift, Schneider, JB Hunt, Landstar, and anything below that, down to 50 truck fleets. We are able to talk to them and get feedback. And I fortunately have been one that has been getting some of that feedback. And I just wanted to share it all with you all to understand where they're coming from and what they're seeing as well. Because we see the spot market going up, but what are these big trucking companies expecting? Because they have a really good pulse. They spend a lot of money to make sure they know what's going on. So just going through the bullet points here, we've hit the floor in terms of rates. As I kind of already mentioned, we can't go lower. We're at the floor. Our costs are too high. They keep going up. We can't go any lower. So we're not going to go lower. That's all there is to it. But a lot of them are telling us that they're expecting 3-ish% rate increases in 2025. So that's great news. That's the first time we've been able to even talk about a rate increase over the last 3 years. It's been pretty much, yeah, they're pushing back. They want to decrease more. They want to decrease more. So fleets are pretty optimistic in the fact that it's negotiation season right now, bid season as they call it. So when they're going to the Walmart or the P&G saying, hey, we need to lock in a rate for the next 6 months, we want X amount more, we're seeing positive signs for the first time in a while, and that's really great news. Trucking companies are actually aggressively growing their infrastructure for IC capacity right now. So trucking companies really like the independent contractor model because drivers make more money. They're safer, actually. Independent contractors are generally safer. They have more experience, you know, they know what they're doing, and they're looking out for themselves. It's their equipment, it's their business. So everybody wins in this scenario for the most part. But carriers are looking to grow their IC count right now, meaning they think things are going to get better. So that's really encouraging. And then one thing that's just, you know, plaguing the industry right now, and even plaguing you as the driver, is turnover. In 2024, it was up at most trucking companies in a dramatic way. And the reason for that is folks are looking for greener grass. It's been a really tough few years, to say the least. Costs have gone up, rates have gone down. It's been a really tough marketplace to run your business the last 3 years. So turnover's been up at a lot of trucking companies. And, you know, a lot of contractors out there, they hear something about some greener grass on the other side, and they're not finding it because it's just not there right now. It's tough in every segment across the country in trucking right now. So turnover's up, and that's costly. It's costly for you all too, right? It's expensive when you have to take week 2 off. Then you got to go to a new trucking company. You got to learn their system. You got to learn their routes, you know, their shippers and things like that. It's difficult to change, especially in a tough market. So yeah, really been tough. So next, I want to talk about the owner-operator population. There's no survey out there. There's no way to gather the information, but I want to talk about what's happened in terms of owner-operator population count. So again, we have relationships with a lot of fleets that you all drive at, and we do surveys with them because we want to learn more. We want to understand the marketplace. We want to see what's going on. And so at the end of 2023, we did a survey, and we asked them, and this is busy, but I'll talk you through it top to bottom. Did you grow or did you shrink throughout the year in 2023 in terms of the number of independent contractors you have? And so in 2023, the average trucking company told us they lost about 16.5% of their independent contractors. That's a big loss ratio. So, you know, a lot of people were going out of business, going back to company driver. A lot of people were leaving the industry, going, you know, altogether. The next line down is the 2023 range. And our trucking company partners told us they lost anywhere between 40% of their fleet, and a few companies went up about 20%. But to be honest, those are companies that went from like 50 trucks to 60 trucks. So not a lot of growth in 2023. Then we asked them, do you want to grow in 2024? Do you want to, you know, grow your IC count in this tough market? About 4% on average was the growth rate, and anywhere from 0 to 25%. So it was a tough market. We lost a lot of independent contractors out there. The next slide is the same question at the end of 2024. Did you grow or did you shrink in terms of the number of independent contractors? And it was down about 10% on average. We're still losing independent contractors from the marketplace because of this continued down market. Not only that, but the range was huge. We had some trucking companies completely go out of business, so down 100%, and we don't know anybody that grew their IC count last year. It's been a really tough time, and just a difficult marketplace. However, people are more optimistic. They do want to grow 3 to 5% this year, and with a range of anywhere from 0 to 20%. That has accelerated a lot since the administration change. So now companies are telling us they've upped their growth goals. They think trucking is going to get better, and they're anticipating needing to haul more freight. So they're really into making sure that they have drivers in place to haul what they hope is an upcoming market. But I want to circle back, because if I look at this, we think by our estimates and our surveys and all the data points we can gather, at the peak of COVID, when things were just fantastic and everybody was buying a truck, getting their authority, buying a trailer, and going out and running that really expensive freight, we think there are about 400,000 owner-operators in the trucking industry. So if I circle back here, in 2023, we lost 16% of the population. In 2024, we lost 10% of the population. That tells us that we lost about 25% of the owner operators over the last 2 years. So we think that we went from about 400,000 owner operators in the marketplace to about 300,000 at the time right now. And again, I hate to say it, but we did need some failure because with all these people flooding the marketplace, it kept rates down artificially long, and we really needed to shift back. So when I say some trucking companies have been failing, when I say owner operators are going out of business, I hate that for them for sure. But at the same time, those of us that are still surviving and out there fighting, we need that to happen because that's going to help rates shift up when we have less trucks on the road. So here's just a different way to look at it. This is from our good friends over at DAT. And so this is a busy chart, but what this is showing us is this is the number of owner operators, or I should say, this is the number of trucking companies entering and exiting the marketplace over time. So there's this break-even line. Anything above that means they're entering the marketplace. Below that means they were exiting the marketplace. So this is a number, again, of motor carriers out there. And you can see prior to the pandemic, from 2013 through even early 2020, the number of new carriers entering the marketplace was pretty static, up year over year on a regular basis. And we expect that in normal market times because GDP is growing, population's growing. Therefore, we need to move more goods and feed more people and do things like that. So we expect steady growth in the number of motor carriers out there. There were a couple blips like in 2017 where we lost some carriers, 2019 when the marketplace was tough, we lost some carriers, but then we hit the pandemic and you can see that line graph here, we just exploded in terms of the number of trucking companies. And here at ATBS, we had people that became our clients that had been in trucking, had never even been in trucking. They went out and bought 4 trucks and said, I can make a bunch of money doing this. Well, guess what? Those people that entered the marketplace at that boom had never been through a down cycle. So they were paying $120,000 for a used truck, putting a driver in it, paying them pretty well. And then, and then rates were great. They expected that to be normal. And this is just how I'm going to run my business. It's going to be easy. And I can deal with these high truck payments and insurances and fixed costs and things like that. Well, guess what? Trucking is cyclical. It's up and down. And you can see that because in 2022, when the marketplace fell apart, we started losing owner-operator companies at a rate we've never seen before, and we continue to this day. So again, if you entered the marketplace in this time period during the boom, you had those high fixed costs and you've never experienced a down market, you pretty much failed out, within a year after conditions went away. So there was a shift back to some trucking companies, but from an ATBS standpoint, those folks that entered the marketplace at that time, they have mostly failed out of trucking from what we can tell. Maybe some of them made a significant pivot and did something different, but a lot of people that entered in those boom years haven't survived these tough few years that we've been through. So that's just kind of setting the stage. Just wanted to make sure that we had a stage of what's going on in trucking. Again, it's been a tough few years to say the least. We know that. We see it with our client averages. We hear it in our client conversations. But there are some really good signs that, especially in that spot market, that we're coming out of this. Not only that, but a lot of the big trucking companies are telling us that they're expecting better things this year too. So it's been a really good end to this first quarter. We hope it continues. So next, we're going to talk about the data. We're going to look at what's going on in different segments of trucking, and then what's going on with the average driver. So first of all, how does it work? We look at 12-month averages. So what we do is we look at the year 2024, what happened in that year versus what happened in 2023. Was it up? Was it down? Were rates up? Were they down? Miles, we're going to look at a lot of different things. And we're fortunate enough that we work with so many of you wonderful drivers out there that we get to use this data to show you what's going on, to help you predict what's next, and to help you run your business more profitably. So first, we'll talk about revenue, and that starts with miles. That's how we generate revenue, as we run miles. Miles continue to trend upward. They had to, right? I mean, when rates went down, when costs went up, we talked about at the beginning 2 years ago when I did this, there were 2 things you can do in a really tough trucking market to make more money. That's it. There's 2 things. You can generate more revenue, which means run more miles and generate that revenue, or you can cut your costs. It's that simple. Your biggest cost is fuel. So we talked about that and said, if you're going to survive in this down market 2 years ago, here's what you got to shift. And so those that have survived, guess what? They've been doing that. They've been shifting back towards that pre-COVID model where, hey, we got to run more miles and we got to really watch every nickel and dime in this tougher market. And the ones that are surviving not only are doing that, but we're going to see they're flourishing even in this difficult market. So miles are up 3.7%, about 3,400 miles on a year-over-year basis. And if you look over here on the bottom right, we break it down by segment. Dry van has increased the most because we're going to see dry van rates have been slashed the most. That's the market we added way too many trucks in, and now to make up an offset for that lower rate, we're having to run a lot harder in the dry van market. So miles are up across the board, except for refrigerated. I'm not quite sure about that one, but the data is the data. So that's looking at miles. This is miles over time, and we've been fortunate enough. We've been in business 26 years. Some of you have been with us almost all that time, so we appreciate your business and helping you out. But back in 2023, drivers are running about, if you look here, about 12,000 miles a month. On average, about 140,000 miles a year back in 2003, and that was in the days when you could run, 3 logbooks and really bend the rules. That was before ELDs as well, so things really changed. But miles went down over time, and then in 2008, we kind of bottomed out, early 2009. Then the Great Recession hit. Things got really tough, right? People weren't spending money, freight wasn't being moved, therefore rates went down, and drivers had to respond by running more miles again, and that's what happened in 2009, 2010. Then in about 2011, we hit equilibrium, and for 5 or 6 years, we just had very consistent miles of around 100,000, maybe a little bit more, 110,000. 2018 happened, and we had a really good freight market. Anytime we have a good freight market, miles go down. You can make more money by doing less, so why would you not choose to do that, right? I mean, if you can spend more time at home with your family and doing the things you love, by all means, and that's what people do. Then 2019 happened, miles went back up in 2020, and then that boom hit where rates were through the roof and miles just fell off a cliff. So from 2020 to 2022, we saw miles just deteriorate. We bottomed out at about 85,000 in 2022, but again, that's when the freight world fell apart and things got tougher and rates went down, and we've been slowly climbing back up towards that average prior to the pandemic. So we are seeing miles continue to go up. I don't know if we're at the peak yet, but we're probably pretty close, and I'll tell you why. And I think you all know better than I do, but I'll tell you what I think. So here's just a different look at it. If I look at it, we do this study every 6 months, so Q2, Q4 of each year. Our latest data is Q4 of 2024 that we're looking at today at the bottom. But what we're seeing here is miles over time. And again, prior to the pandemic, the average was sitting at 100,000 very consistently. And I mean very consistently. And then the pandemic happened, and as I said, miles fell off a cliff. In Q4 of 2022, we bottomed out at about 85,000 miles. We've been climbing back out since then, but what's interesting is the last 2 cycles we've done this, we are stuck at about 93,100 miles. So I think that might be the new average. There is room to grow, but I believe some things have happened. I believe driver expectations have shifted. People are getting home more, and that balance and that quality of life has become more important, and that's completely understandable. I think that the length of haul has shortened. There's always more warehouses popping up, so there's less long haul freight. So loads are just shorter than they used to be, and that sucks up more time, as you all know very well. But I've also heard multiple anecdotes that detention time has gone up, that it's just tougher to get backed into a dock, to get in your spot, to get unhooked and things like that. So I've heard a lot of anecdotes from carriers, from drivers and things like that, that detention time has really gone up since the pandemic, where dock workers were laid off, but they weren't hired back up when we needed them, and we need them now. So that's just anecdotal. I can't prove that. I bet you all know better than I do because you deal with it on a daily basis. But that's what's happened with miles is we lost about 15% from the pandemic boom. We've gained about 10% of it back. There is some wiggle room there, but we might be close to the new equilibrium. So that's a good thing though, because as we're adding more miles, we're keeping rates down, and we don't want that to happen, that's for sure. Because as we're looking at now, we're looking at the average revenue per mile. And so this is the all-in revenue per mile. This includes the fuel surcharge. So we've seen a pretty big degradation in the revenue, about 5.3%, about 10 cents a mile for our average client last year in terms of revenue per mile. So Yeah, pretty big drop. And again, over here on the bottom right, I've got it by segments. Again, the dry van, they took it in the chin. It was a tough year. It continued to be a very difficult market in the dry van sector, down to $1.71 on average. So rates have really deteriorated in that dry van segment. What I'm going to tell you though, in a positive spin out of this, is of that 10 cents per mile, about 7 cents of it was due to the fuel surcharge. So that tells me true rate only went down about 3 cents on average. And then you can back into the other ones. If I subtract 7 cents from dry van, for example, dry van actually went down about 6 cents in true rate after you back out that fuel. So rates were down, continue to push down. But what's encouraging is flatbed and reefer. If I back that 7 cents out of those, we're actually up in those segments in terms of revenue per mile. So one thing I've always said is that when things are moving on a flatbed, we're in for better economic times. That means there's construction, there's building, there's home building and things like that going on. So anytime flatbed is doing well, it's generally a precursor to better economic times. I can't promise that now because I know housing is slow, but I do know that commercial construction is up, and I do know that there was that massive infrastructure bill that was passed 2 or 3 years ago by the previous administration for I want to say $2 trillion. And we are finally starting to see those funds, and you guys see it more than I do. There's construction everywhere. So that stuff's all being hauled on a flatbed, meaning that flatbed's seeing quite a bit better of a market than others, sooner. But again, they're usually a leading precursor. So this looks pessimistic, but when you back out the fuel, it's better than you think, almost flat on a year-over-year basis. And again, that's because we basically hit the bottom. We can't really go lower. So this shows that. This shows what's going on after I back out the fuel surcharge. So this is the revenue per mile after I back out the fuel surcharge. We peaked in 2022, as I mentioned. We've slowly deteriorated from 22 to 23. And then in early 2024 is when we kind of hit rock bottom. And we've been slowly just bouncing back up a little bit in terms of true rate because the cost of fuel is going down. So very encouraging to see that we hit the bottom in 2024. We're not really accelerating up in this average right now, but we are seeing signs that this should be going up in the near future, and we're hearing it. So again, yeah, we hit the bottom. We're not going down because we can't. Are we starting to go up? It looks like it in the spot market, and it seems like fleets are going to start taking rate increases with shippers. We'll just have to see how it shakes out with tariffs and other things like that. So does it make sense to run in the spot market, or does it make sense to run for a motor carrier? We like to track this over time. And so if we look at the bottom, this is our general understanding, based on averages and things like that. We're an accounting firm, so we're pretty good at math and getting averages and deriving information. But we think it costs, if you look at the very bottom, about $52,000 more a year, $52,500 more a year to go run on your own authority versus running at a motor carrier. Or about 48, call it 50 cents a mile for round numbers, 48 cents more a mile you need to earn in the spot market versus running at a motor carrier. And the reasons for that are listed above, but you got to get your own licenses, permits, figure out your fuel tax. Your insurance is killer. The additional insurance that you have to get when you're on your own is very, very expensive, about $12,500 more. You do have to buy your own trailer. You have to book, bill, and collect for your own loads, which is a pain. Most people have to get some kind of factoring agreement or something like that in place. And then the biggest thing is operational losses, right? When you've got your own authority, you've got one trailer, you have to wait for loading, unloading. It's a big time suck. You can't go, back into a dock, unhook a trailer, and then go hook up to another trailer in the trailer pool. You've only got one. So there is no trailer pool. So it's pretty expensive to run on your own. But a lot of drivers have it figured out, which we'll talk about here in a second. So anytime freight's really good, in 2018, you can see that line there, that's the break even. In 2018, we were far above it, about 70 cents above, but it only cost you 48 cents to get there. So you're at a net gain. In 21, 22, we were way above it. And so the spot market was very advantageous. But what I want to look at is a really, closer scale of the pandemic and then what's happened after the pandemic. So again, we skyrocketed in 2020 and we peaked at one point. It paid you $1.36 more a mile, and it only cost you 48 cents more a mile to get there. So you're at a net gain of almost 90 cents a mile at the peak, meaning you could make 90 cents more per mile to your truck at the peak of the pandemic than you could at the average motor carrier. Well, guess what? Again, this is what I was talking about earlier. Everybody entered the marketplace at the tail end of this bubble. They paid way too much for their truck. They're expecting rates to be up. And then if you look at May of 2022, that's when the world shifted all at once, because this spot market, as I said, it reacts quickly to changes. And it did. And so the rates fell off a cliff in May of 2022, and they just keep bouncing on the bottom. Again, you keep seeing these false starts where it looks like it's coming back up, coming back up, coming back up, and then it falls off. And so this only goes through the end of 2024. In early 2025, I'll tell you, it fell off a cliff in January, February, but now we're climbing back up and we're almost at that break-even point again here at the end of March. So I'm really hoping this isn't another false start. But what I'll tell you is if you went out and got your own authority during the boom, you've probably, again, you've either failed out or you've shifted back to a motor carrier. But our clients that are on their own authority still to this day are actually doing really well. They're actually improving their business. And that's because they're running their truck like a business. They're looking at their costs, they're shifting their fuel mileage, they're expanding their zones, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but they're making shifts in how they do business, and they've had to in order to survive this down market. So next, gross revenue. Gross revenue is down 1.8%, almost 2%, or about $3,000 year over year. So nothing to write home about, not a big deal. The vast majority of this revenue loss came from the fuel surcharge, right? Since we're paying less to cover the cost of fuel because it's cheaper, revenue goes down accordingly. So I'll tell you, this isn't a big deal at all, because this is the fuel, which we'll talk about next. So now let's talk about costs. Costs have been crazy variable all over the place for the last 4 years. And I've got some exciting news that we're really balancing out in terms of cost too. So we're starting to see some balance across the board, and that's a good thing because that means we have predictability. When things are rapidly rising, rapidly dropping, costs are changing, rates are changing, it's really hard to run your business because you have to focus on your numbers and change daily. It's a little bit easier to do long-term forecasting and think when things are more stable like they are today. So fixed costs is what we're looking at here. Fixed costs are up 1.5% year over year, about $850, and they're about 60 cents a mile right now. So what's encouraging here is, yes, fixed costs are up, insurance is up, truck payments always go up, but this is very stable because you expect this to travel with inflation. 2 to 3%, just like inflation, is what you expect your fixed costs to go up on a yearly basis. So what I'll tell you is, a year ago when we did this, fixed costs were actually up like 8% year over year. So 2023 was just brutal because not only were rates dropping rapidly, but costs were rising rapidly at the same time. Again, that's what caused some of these high failures in the trucking industry. So fixed costs are stable for the first time in almost 4 years. And that's really encouraging because, again, it creates predictability for us. So what about variable costs? They're down 5.1%. Variable costs, and the vast majority of this came from fuel. So fuel is down a lot, so variable costs chased it down accordingly. But very encouraging here, variable costs are going down. And you can see on this line graph, really it was the second half of the year where those cost differences were made. That's because fuel chased down. You all remember it well. All of us do that drive a four-wheeler like myself, or an 18-wheeler like you all. Fuel was going down last fall, end of last summer, last fall, and you could see it, you could feel it at the pump, because when you filled up, that total cost to fill up your tank was going down drastically. So this actually created a cash flow gain for our drivers. It was much needed after a long struggle, but we'll talk about that here in a second. So last thing I'll note is variable costs are set right now at about 70 cents a mile. So the average owner-operator is at about 70 cents per mile in terms of variable costs. So we'll talk about that more here in a second, about how you can use that to your advantage, how you need to know your variable costs and what they'll do for you. But I'm just going to go through the data first, and then we'll go through some tips and things like that at the end. So total costs down 2% year over year, or about $2,700. So that's just fantastic news. Again, we needed that reprieve. Rates balanced out, but our costs actually went down. So those of you that have made those shifts where you're running a little bit harder, where you're getting better fuel mileage, your costs are actually going down accordingly too. So we're seeing some of especially our best business-minded clients, they're really seeing some gains even in this really tough market. And that's just fantastic news. That just shows you running your truck like a business works every time. You can't run it based on emotions or things like that. So next is fuel. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I was looking at revenue per mile. But fuel on a year-over-year basis is actually down 11.3% in terms of cost. So a huge reduction in fuel cost. And again, if you look at these bar graphs, starting in about August is when we really saw that drastic drop in year-over-year fuel. Really encouraging, again, much needed. But if we look, that fuel cost down 7 cents per mile year-over-year is a big drop. 7 cents a mile is a big deal. That adds up really quickly when you're running 93,000 miles. So huge cost savings in fuel, really encouraging to see, because again, that's created a cash flow. So what about over time? We just always have tracked the fuel mileage over time. As technology, as aerodynamics increase, we expect this to continually increase. But what's great to see, there was a huge bump in 2020, and initially we couldn't figure out why, but it's because there was no congestion. You all probably were having the best time of your lives as drivers in 2020 because I wasn't on the road and everybody commuting wasn't on the road, so you could just cruise through cities and had no congestion, no traffic jams, no accidents, things like that. So fuel mileage went through the roof because you didn't have to be on your brakes at that time. Then coming into 21, 22, it went down again. There was actually no reason to get good fuel mileage. Rates were so good at that time. There was no need to slow down because you were just chasing the next mile because revenue was so good. But starting in 2023, we have started to see fuel mileage go back up. Again, that's what we've been saying for 2 years. You can earn more revenue, you can cut your costs. Your biggest cost is fuel, so let's cut it. Generally speaking, the difference between 6 miles per gallon and 7 miles per gallon is $6,000 to $8,000 take home. So think about that. 6 miles to the gallon to 7 miles to the gallon. That's $6,000 to $8,000 more in your pocket because every dollar you save, you actually get to keep. So really encouraging to see that drivers have reacted. They've had to. Technology, of course, is part of that too. But drivers are really, I see it on the road that habits have shifted. Myself being fortunate enough to travel, for work. When I'm on I-40 in Arkansas, which you all probably know well, it's a very heavily trafficked lane. But in 21 and 22, I'd be going 80 down 40, and I had trucks thundering past me. When I was doing that a couple months ago, nobody was passing me. So drivers' habits have shifted for sure. They've had to because you got to keep that money in your pocket. So this is just looking at a different angle, and this is good to benchmark yourself based on which segment you're running freight in. What kind of fuel mileage are you getting? In the dry van sector, we're up to 7.35 right now. Overall, we're at 7.12. So we are seeing pretty big shifts in fuel mileage, and just depending on your segment, of course, in flatbed and things like that, you're not going to be as aerodynamic. But really, realistically, you should be in the 7 range. We have drivers that are in the 10 range, where they are actually, timing out their time through cities and making sure they're not hitting congestion and, staying really far back so they're not braking and things of that nature. And they're really doing well right now when they're watching their biggest cost the most. So again, good to just benchmark yourself. This slide's busy, but I'll talk you through it. So at the bottom, let's start there. We talked about both these stats, but revenue per mile is down 5% or 10 cents a mile. But on the bottom right, revenue is down $3,100 on the year. However, fuel is down 11% or 7 cents a mile, but down $4,300 on the year. So revenue was down $3,100, but fuel was down even more, $4,300. That's that net cash flow gain I was talking about. And the way that works is a lot of trucking companies reset their fuel surcharge every Monday. And on Monday, you get, call it 40 cents a mile for fuel surcharge. But by Saturday, the pump price has already gone down 10 cents. You're still getting paid on that Monday rate, but the pump price has gone down. So that gives you a net cash flow gain where they're paying you for more expensive fuel, but you're fueling for less. And so you can see on this line graph, same story as above or before, starting in August, those lowering costs really went to a net cash flow gain for you all, where we saw more profitability in the second half of last year. We're starting to, balance out in that rate right there, but really good and necessary cash flow that went into our drivers' pockets, and hopefully you all saw that. So what about truck payments? Truck payments are painful. They go up over time. Trucks are more expensive, parts are more expensive. It's just difficult. But truck payments have gone up over time. We're actually nearing about $2,900 a month for the average owner-operator truck payment today. So it continues to go up. The only time we've ever seen a decrease was in 2010, 2011. That was coming out of the Great Recession when the marketplace got flooded with used trucks. Freight was really tough. A lot of people went out of business after the Great Recession or during the Great Recession. I will tell you though, the market is getting flooded with trucks again right now. So I'm not telling you truck payments will go down, but there is the potential. And what's interesting to me is a 3-year-old truck with 350,000 miles 3 years ago would have been $120,000. That same truck today is $40,000 or $45,000. So used truck costs have gone down tremendously. And this is an opportunity when the market does shift. And again, I'm not telling you that it shifted yet, but it sure looks like it's going to. When the market does shift, we're going to see people able to buy new trucks. They're going to be able to add trucks at a very affordable rate. So let's say a decent used truck is $45,000. You go in and put 15 grand down. You've got a very low monthly truck cost in a rising freight market. You're in really good shape. And I do believe we're going to see more used trucks enter the marketplace and rates are going to go down. Not only that, but with the pressure on interest rates to go down, if we've got really low purchasing prices and interest rates shift downward, it's going to be a big opportunity to upgrade your equipment or add to your fleet when the market changes. So, do it based on your truck needs. Don't do it based on market conditions, but, really have a good maintenance plan. Could you afford a new truck, or should you afford yourself a new truck? You need to balance out your current truck payment and what you're paying for maintenance versus what you can get. The best way to do that is to run a budget, get some averages. We can help you with that. That's really easy, and that's what we're here to do is help you with that. But here in the near future, or even now, might be the time if your maintenance costs are getting high or your downtime is getting high from maintenance to consider getting yourself a new truck. Because if you can put a decent down payment down and you have a decent credit score, you're in really good shape to get yourself in a better truck, a better asset, and really move it along. So pretty encouraging to see. They could go down. I'm not telling you they will, but they could. There is that new technology coming out pretty soon, so that always makes things go up when that happens. All right, so maintenance. What about maintenance? Maintenance is up 6.6% total on a year-over-year basis. That's totally expected because miles were up. Anytime miles go up, you do expect maintenance to go up accordingly. That's just wear and tear on your vehicle, right? You got to do more PMs, more things break. I mean, that's just the way it goes. But that's a pretty modest rate, so that was very expected. What I'll tell you is the average owner operator, if you look at this line graph, they're still sitting at about 12, 13 cents a mile is what we're seeing in terms of the average cost per mile. That varies wildly though, right? If you've got a 2024 international or Freightliner or whatever it is with warranty and things like that, you're probably 3 cents a mile. Or if you're that person that runs the 2010 Freightliner or 2010 Peterbilt that's not aerodynamic and has 1 million miles on it, you're going to be more like 20 cents a mile. So it varies wildly. You need to have a custom maintenance plan depending on your vehicle, and that needs to change at least every year at the very minimum. So a lot of people save based on the mile. Some people save based, a certain amount every week. But maintenance happens, right? And it's part of the job. It's part of, operating a vehicle is having that maintenance cost. You can look at the bottom again. It's broken out by segment. But yeah, maintenance costs pretty stable when you factor in the miles into it. So maintenance costs overall. This is again just over time. Back in the Great Recession, maintenance fell off a cliff in 2008, 2009. People just weren't fixing their trucks. You just defer it, right? Like, hey, I don't need to fix it now. I need to make money. I don't have time for that. So they were deferring their maintenance. Coming out of it, we saw maintenance skyrocket because people had to fix their trucks. They let them go too long. We did see maintenance start to drop in 2023, and we were a little bit worried that was going to happen again, but it picked right back up. So, what I heard anecdotally, and you probably all know again better than I do, but you can't defer maintenance. There's so many sensors, there's so many things internally with technology that just won't let you do that anymore. They just shut you down, or you just can't run under certain conditions that way. So it's just shifted, the dynamic shifted, and that all makes sense. But maintenance pretty flat when you factor in the increased miles. So what about the fun part? Net income. That's what we all want, right? To make more money. Net income is up slightly year over year. up $1,100 up to $64,000. Now, what I'll tell you is this net income average factors in turnover. So I told you earlier, turnover was up. And when drivers are turning over, their net income is lower. So we had a lot of partial data sets in this that we did not filter out. So I'll show you what I believe is probably more realistic here in a second. But net income is up year over year, meaning that those extra miles and that better fuel mileage is starting to pay off. But again, let me talk a little bit further, and then we'll talk about what I believe real net income is for a true owner operator that's running all year. So here's another way to look at it. We peaked in 2021 in terms of net income, 2022. Then we fell off, and we've just been bouncing on the bottom. Again, up slightly at the end of 2024, as you can see on these bar graphs in the top right. And again, a lot of that came from that fuel surcharge cash flow, but we've really just been flat. So over the last 2 years, drivers have been increasing their miles. They've been cutting their fuel costs just to break even in terms of their net income. So again, you've all been working harder. You've been pitching your pennies, and it's now starting to pay off, where we're starting to see net income go up. So next, I want to look at the life of an owner operator over the last 22 years. And again, these don't factor out turnover, which I'll do here in a second to show you some different numbers when I take that out. But if I look at this over time, miles on the top left, drivers used to run 139,000 miles a year, and then on the bottom left, at that time, they were making 47,600. Now, if I go all the way to the right, drivers are now running about 93,000 miles a year to make $64,000 a year. So think about that. That is about 40-some thousand less miles a year, 46,000 less miles a year. And then income has gone up about with inflation. So, it hasn't gotten more advantageous, but what's happened, is that the quality of life has gotten better. We're not having to run 140,000 miles to make that net income. But what I really want to talk about, and what's most encouraging, is next. That's going to be when I factor out turnover, what is actual net income? Because when you're only there, 4 months out of the year, that's going to drag down our average big time. So when I look at ATBS clients that have been with us over a year, these are clients that are really working hard to run their truck like a business, and it really shows in the net income. So if I look in the middle third of ATBS clients, all the way to the right, the real true average is $86,732. So that's when I take out that turnover. The true owner operator that's running their truck like a business all year is up to $86,732. Our top third of clients are up to $156,093. And then in the very bottom right, our top 10% of independent contractors are at $215,594. What's so encouraging about this is if I look, we bottomed out in 2023 Q2, right in the middle of this data set, where our top third were at $150,006 and our top 10% were at $206. These two segments have been growing despite market conditions getting worse over the last 2 years. So again, those drivers that are looking at their P&L, they're adjusting their budget, they know their variable cost per mile, they know their fixed costs per day, they're taking that extra load, they're actually thriving. They're doing better even in a down market. So that just shows you that even when conditions get tough, you can actually do even better if you make changes and run your truck like a business. And our top operators are doing that consistently right now. So it's very important, and it's working. And that's very encouraging to see. So we're about done. Couple things left. I want to talk about contribution margin. I think this is very underutilized amongst independent contractors. Contribution margin is how you should run any business, and I'll explain it in the best way I can, and then we're going to look at a real life example. So contribution margin is, first of all, you take the revenue you generated. I usually like to do it by the mile. So the revenue you generated, and subtract all the variable costs out that you incurred to generate that revenue. So I like to do it by the mile. And it's very simple. The money left you have is your contribution margin. So your revenue minus your variable costs equals your contribution margin. And so let's talk about what that means and why it's important and why you need to know that. And we're focusing on that heavily within our consulting team here. We're looking at budgets. We're really helping drivers understand it. And so we talked about this, taking an extra load, and we're just going to go through this line by line. So we got on the left, we've got miles, revenue per mile, gross, fixed costs, variable cost per mile, contribution margin, and profit. So what does one more load do for you? So one more load, let's just, I use really simple numbers in a 1 month time frame. One more load at 500 miles, the revenue per mile, I just took our average, $1.83 a mile. That's going to gross us 500 times $1.83 is going to gross us $915 for that load. Our fixed costs have been covered because this is an extra load, meaning we've already paid for those fixed costs with our contribution margin early on. Our variable cost per mile, I took the ATBS average of 70 cents per mile. Our contribution margin is this revenue, the $1.83 revenue per mile, minus the variable cost, minus 70 cents. Our contribution margin is $1.13 a mile. That means, since I've already paid for my fixed costs, I'm going to profit $1.13 every single mile on this extra 500 miles. So $1.13 times that extra 500 miles gives me $560 in profit for that one extra load you take. So what's important here, and the takeaway from this, is you need to know your contribution margin, because you need to understand, when are my fixed costs going to be paid for? What am I at there? And then what do I need to do to get to my desired income level after that? How many more loads do I need to take to get to where I need to be based on this contribution margin? Because that's what your profit is after you pay for your fixed costs. So on that 1 month scale, that one extra load scale, that one extra load is making you on average 565 more bucks. If we do that one extra load for 12 months, let's just look at the profit. That's almost $7,000, $6,780 for that extra load. Pretty incredible, right? And then on the right here, I just did it with 2 extra loads. But if you're really running hard, you're working hard, on the bottom right, if you take those 2 extra loads at the current market conditions, you can make $13,560 more just looking at these round numbers. So again, this contribution margin, it's a foreign concept to a lot of us, but it's revenue minus variable costs. That's our profit after we've kicked our fixed costs down the road till the next week. So it's very important to get a grasp on your numbers. That way you can understand where you need to be to hit the profit levels you need to be at to achieve your goals, right? Do you want to buy another truck? Do you need to fix something at home? Do you need a new car? What is it that you need? What is it going to cost? And then let's make a map of how we get there together, because we can help you with that. So last few thoughts here. Trucking's been tough, right? And when I've been talking to these trucking companies, when I've been looking at our drivers, talking to our business consultants about what the best drivers are doing right now, they don't have these notations. So one, I'm going to say extend your range. Don't say something like, I won't go north of I-40 in the winter. Most people live above I-40, so you have to go up into Chicago. That's where the good freight is anyway. But not only that, extend your range to places that you maybe don't like. In a down market, what we've seen is the best drivers don't say no to going to the Northeast. I know there's tolls, I know there's hurdles, I know there's things like that, but that's where the best paying freight goes. Yeah, it's a backhaul out of there. It's cheaper freight to get out of there sometimes. But if you look at it, the best drivers are running lanes essentially from like Chicago to the Northeast and back, where they're like, I want to get this really expensive freight from the upper Midwest or from any manufacturing center to get to where the people live, because that pays really well, and then just get a load out of there. It doesn't matter, get it out of there and get back to that strong market so you can do it again. We've seen that. I understand. I hate driving there too, but that's where people live, and that's where the best paying freight goes. So don't go, and get yourself in trouble and, get yourself in safety issues, but, consider extending your range, because it's going to help you out a lot. Next, I'm going to say is understand freight cycles. Freight cycles are really important in trucking. Which days of the week are the strongest to pick up freight? Generally Monday and Friday. If you have a delivery that gets there on Saturday or Sunday, you're going to be sitting around. So it's really tough, right? And so you really need to understand the weekly freight cycles, but also months in the quarter. Generally speaking, March is a really strong month. People are moving inventory before end of quarter. Same thing with June, same thing with September. And then in the fall, it shifts, right? Where the freight cycle is stronger in October and November, because companies are moving freight before the holiday season. So you need to understand freight cycles, and there's a lot of good information on the internet about this. If you go to atbs.com, we've got stuff on freight cycles. You can just Google it or use our search bar up there, and you can find information about it, but you need to understand those freight cycles and use them to your advantage. Utilize your company's fuel routing software. I hear so many drivers that don't do that, and I don't understand it. These companies have invested tens of millions of dollars to develop this software to help, utilize everything that they know about fuel, about cost, about fuel tax. That's one thing a lot of drivers maybe don't understand enough is the fuel tax. But they've spent tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to put this fuel software in place for their company trucks so that they can make more money. They're giving you this technology for free to use, and we hear a lot of drivers don't use it. It is literally has been built to maximize and efficiency and lower your costs. So if you're not using your company's fuel software, I really encourage you to rethink that. It's a big deal, and it's really going to help you save money, because the thing you're not looking at probably is fuel tax. Every state has a different fuel tax, and that software is factoring that in. Always run your business off your P&L. People can be emotional, myself included, right? When you have a bad week, when something doesn't go your way, you get frustrated, and it changes your attitude, changes your mindset. Run your business off your profit and loss statement. What is actually going on? Did your revenue go down because you took too much time off? Did you get stuck in a snowstorm? Were your fuel costs up? What changed that you're not making as much money? And then how do we fix that change? So run your business off your numbers. Make sure you're making educated decisions. As I showed you a little bit ago, the best drivers out there have changed their mindset. They're running their truck like a business. They're running more miles. They're cutting their costs. They're trimming things out. And they're actually becoming more profitable even as rates continue downward over the last 2 years. So super encouraging to see that if you do run your truck like a business and look at your numbers and make changes on a daily basis, you can actually make more money even in a down market. And then last thing, and I'll never harp on this enough, but you have to know your costs. What are your fixed costs per day? What are your variable costs per mile? You should be able to see your profitability and say, hey, this load is paying me $1,000. I know my fixed costs are $125 a day, and I'm spending 75 cents a mile to run my truck. I can calculate those things quickly and say that this is going to be my profit per day. So if you're out there on a load board choosing your loads, you should be able to say number of days, total revenue, fixed cost per day, variable cost per mile, here's my profit. And you know your profit per day. A lot of drivers just look at the all-in rate and say, well, this is 2,000 and this one's 1,800. The 2,000 takes you 2 more days. So you really have to look at that, and then you have to back into what is going to be my profit per day. But the simplest tip I can give you is what is the highest revenue per day, right? If you're out there choosing loads, looking at freight, what is your highest average revenue per day? 99 times out of 100, that's what's going to make you the most money is that highest revenue per day. There's exceptions when you add in tolls and things like that, but that's generally speaking going to be what makes you the most money. So it's been a very difficult environment. We're coming to an end here, but it's been a really difficult environment. I know it has been. The best drivers are making decisions. We are starting to see really positive signs in the spot market, the most we've seen in 3 years. And again, that's usually the leading indicator to trucking getting better. So it does look positive. Carriers are optimistic right now. There is certain hurdles out there, like we've never been down this tariff road before, and this isn't a political statement. We just don't know, right? And so we don't know what that's going to do. Some people think positive, some people think negative. It depends who you ask. Either way, it's exciting to see that we're seeing really positive trends. Net income's up. Drivers are doing better. Rates seemingly are going up in the spot market, and carriers are telling us they're pushing for higher rates for the first time in 3 years. So generally speaking, keep doing what you're doing. Really run your truck like a business. If you don't have your numbers honed in, you need to focus on that first, and then make those adjustments quickly, and you're going to start to see profit immediately. If you don't have help, we're here to help you. But that's all I got. I don't see any questions posted in this chat. I think I covered most of the questions throughout the presentation that were on there. There were a lot of questions about tariffs. There were a lot of questions about have we hit the bottom, which again we have, and we're starting to come back up. It's just going to be a slow grind, right? But the good news is we don't want to go up really fast. we saw what happened last time. When we skyrocketed up during the pandemic, we added a bunch of trucks, a bunch of drivers, we flooded the market, we had 2 really good years, and now we've had 3 really tough years because of that. So what we want is we want slow, steady growth where we're adjusting our business and we're cutting our costs, but our rates are going up at the same time. Our truck payments have the ability to go down, with a good credit score and a good down payment right now. So we want to see that slow, grind up with rates. And I think we're about to see that. So things are really pointed in the right direction. And, I think it's going to be a good last 9 months of 2025, barring any, sudden changes or an economic recession or anything like that. We're in it for a better year this year with slow, sustained growth where we think things are going to get better throughout the year. So that's all I got today. I appreciate everybody's time. This will be sent to you. Oh, I see a question up here. Did your net numbers include depreciation? They do include depreciation. So thanks for that question, but they do include depreciation. So that would lower it for sure. But yeah, still been a tough market. Anyway, thanks for the question. I appreciate it. Again, thank you all for your time. And if you all have questions, you're welcome to reach out to us at any time. If you have questions on this presentation, it is going to be sent to you via recording, but you can reach out to us directly and we're happy to answer any additional questions you have. So thank you all for your time. You have a wonderful night wherever you are, and please be safe out there. We appreciate everything you do. Bye.